Hello and welcome to Game Objective. My name is Brad Glasgow and I'm going to try to keep this video on a PG-13 level and hopefully keep it monetized. So if you find some word choices to be a little bit odd, that might be the reason why. Now, one of the first rules of journalism is to follow the money. And the recent success of Studio FOW, which I'm going to refer to as Studio FOW, their Kickstarter for their upcoming game Subverse, is something that seems to be underreported on in the industry. There is an undeniably large market out there for lewd games, and you might be surprised to learn about the sheer size of this somewhat underground market. Later on, I'll talk about some of the difficulties this market has had to endure. But first, let's take a look at all of that money. Subverse is the most obvious case. It is being created by Studio FOW, a studio of anonymous creators who have been creating porn movies using video game characters, mostly in Source Filmmaker, for years. These videos are unabashedly hardcore, and they can be quite disturbing, but they're animation and their production can also rival well-established game studios. The FOW team decided to use their talents to make an original video game, and they created a new studio called FOW Interactive. That game, of course, is Subverse, and they launched a Kickstarter asking for £100,000, which is about $128,000 to create it. They earned over £1.6 million, or more than $2.1 million. Now, that's of course a drop in the bucket compared to a major studio game, which can easily break $100 million or more. But compare that to other Kickstarter games like Shovel Knight, which earned $311,000. Divinity Original Sin received $944,000. Original Sin 2 raised just slightly over $2 million. The successful crowdfunding of Subverse, it can't be denied. But the lewd game market is a lot bigger than just Subverse, though it's difficult to tell how big, especially when they don't raise their money through crowdfunding. We know that games like Honey Pop were wildly successful, so much so that a slew of copycats came to Steam soon after, and we can expect a lot more copycats as Honey Pop 2 will be coming out later this year. You can find some of those copycats on an adult version of Steam called Newtaku, which largely serves the hentai market. It's not easy to tell just how successful they have been, though they do have somewhere close to 300 games, and they're owned by MindGeek, the same company that owns the Pornhub network. A lot of these adult games don't make their money through Steam or Kickstarter or Newtaku. It's likely that most of them make most of their money on Patreon. Some time ago, Patreon made it possible to hide the amount that you make from the public. But using the tracking website Graphtreon, we can see or we can get a good estimate of just how big this market is. Under adult games, the top earner is for a game called Summertime Saga, which is among perhaps the most common of the lewd games, the visual novel. It has basic or no actual gameplay features, and it's kind of a choose-your-own-adventure. The team behind Summertime Saga, which uses original artwork, makes nearly $60,000 per month on Patreon. Now, this is for an incomplete game, which gets updates every 2 to 3 months. The game even has a detailed walkthrough article on IGN. There are several other creators in the same market that make $20,000 to $30,000 a month, even up to over $50,000 per month. One of those creators in the category is TurboDriver, which doesn't make a game, but rather makes a mod called Wicked Whims for the wildly popular Sims 4. This mod makes it possible for your Sims to have explicit and uncensored relations with each other. The thing with this mod is that it's really a framework where other modders can add things to it like animations. The Wicked Whims mod itself has made its creator somewhere around $300,000 total just on Patreon. Some of the people creating animations for it are making over $1,000 a month right now. Sex in video games, or modding sex or nudity into video games, has been around a long time. What's new is this underground industry that has been created, largely thanks to creator supporting services like Patreon. Of course, many of these modders and creators use other methods of raising money, such as PayPal, and those aren't as easy to track. So it's impossible to put a number on the size of this industry. But it's obviously a huge industry, and it's growing. But of course, I'm only talking about the success stories here. For every successful modder or creator, there are thousands of people creating adult-oriented games and mods who are earning little to no money doing so. And even for the successful creators, the market can be filled with dangers. One of those dangers is Patreon itself, as we saw when they suddenly terminated the account of Studio Foul. According to Studio Foul people, Patreon was, quote, giving us awards and plaques just a couple of years ago. Studio Foul also said that they saw the writing on the wall with their Patreon termination, and they were able to mitigate the damage by preparing. Other creators aren't so lucky. The change with Patreon seems to be due to pressure from its payment processors. This resulted in the sudden termination of many accounts of people who relied on Patreon to fund their creations. Most of these modders and creators are not making a living doing the work that they're doing, but rather using that income to fund what is essentially a hobby to them. And they are at the mercy of other companies who may or may not feel that their content is objectionable enough to outright terminate. Patreon's current guidelines allow for a lot of interpretation. They say that they have, quote, zero tolerance when it comes to the glorification of sexual violence, and they don't allow fringe sexual fetish creations such as incest. But then they say that their rules would allow fiction such as Game of Thrones. In other words, it appears to be up to their Trust and Safety Council team, and as the old saying goes, they know what porn is when they see it. But it's not just Patreon giving these creators trouble. Steam also has issues with consistent enforcement. Steam has long been a platform where the rules are vague and sometimes even conflicting as for what's allowed in its store. But a year ago in June, they seemed to allow any content which is not outright illegal or what they deemed as, quote, trolling. In practice, however, it's not that easy. Steam has banned or disallowed numerous games and accounts for what it calls gray area content. Much of that has to do with underage or seemingly underage characters, but not all of it is even sexual. Of course, Valve is known for having troubles with communication, so exactly what their guidelines are is unknown. And I should mention that some of those games that Steam has banned are also banned by Nutaku as well. Lewd games and modding are on the rise, and it's somewhat like the Wild West out there. Some lucky creators are making their fortunes in the dangerous landscape, while others are having their income taken away for vague, sometimes even contradictory reasoning. It seems like not long ago there was a big scandal around hot coffee for Grand Theft Auto, and Mass Effect appeared on cable news for showing some alien breast. But now we're going to have Subverse. Times are changing. Whether it's for the better or not, I'll leave that up to you. And speaking of supporting creators, if you've gotten this far in the video, please don't forget to hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment if you'd like to talk about anything you like or don't like about what I'm doing. And if you'd like to support me and my work, I'd appreciate it if you could drop me a donation on Patreon or PayPal at the links below. Until next time, this has been Brad Glasgow with Game Objective. Thanks for watching.